I was homeless from the age of 15 until I was about 24, so that's 7 years ago now.
Yes.
And I'd never heard of the Vagrancy Act when I first became homeless at 15. The first time I heard of that act is while I was sleeping in an alleyway, and about 2 a.m. a police officer kicked me and told me to wake up and move, otherwise he would arrest me under it. Because it makes sleeping in a public place illegal.
Yes.
Very few people are arrested under it, which is usually the defence that's given of this act, is that it's not really used to arrest homeless people. What it is used for is to make their life worse. At 15, it was rarely used. When I first became homeless, it was a rarely used thing.
Right.
But by the time I was sort of 19, 20, it was 3 or 4 times a night I would get kicked and told to move to a different area. The other way that it's used is it bans begging, which lots of people who might have, negative experience of being asked for money every time they travel to work might be thinking, well, that's a good reason to keep it then. But if somebody is actually asking for money, there are other laws you can get them under, especially if they're being harassing or problematic. The Vagrancy Act, that section of the Vagrancy Act, is used to arrest people who look homeless. So, for example, there was an alleyway in Oxford that I used to sleep in most nights, and I used to sleep there mainly because there was a streetlight right next to it. So it meant that I could read books into the evening. So I could go there, I could get charity shop books. That used to be most of my sort of life, was going and getting books in the charity shop and going and sitting in an alleyway until a police officer told me to move.
And where would they expect you? This might be a rhetorical question, but I wish it wasn't. Where would they expect you to go after they moved you along?
Away from the town centre.
That was all they cared about?
That's what they care about. It's essentially used to cleanse town centres of homeless people so that people don't have to see them. The problem for homeless people is that all of the services they need are also in the town centres.
Which is why it took me a while to work that out, actually. It's why the bigger the city, the more gravitation towards it there is from people who've been rendered homeless. And I mean, and I know that would be... It's an odd one, isn't it? Because if there's two things going on here, Dave. I'm choosing my words carefully because you've led us into such sensitive territory. But a politician who pledges to clear the streets of homeless people and a politician who pledges to solve homelessness are actually, in a way, promising the same thing for very different reasons. And what you describe is how clearing the streets of homeless people does not necessarily solve homelessness. I hadn't clocked that before.
It just pushes it into more corners and tries to
puts
push
you
away
more
from
at
town
risk,
centres.
makes you more vulnerable.
Well, look, I remember one time getting arrested in Oxford, driven about an hour away from town. It might not have been an hour, I might be exaggerating that, but I was certainly driven out of town and then de-arrested and kind of left on the outskirts of town.
On your jog.
I think they hoped that would make me leave town, but all it meant is that I spent the next 24 hours walking back to town.
And then you become somebody... I mean, if you had gone somewhere else, the problem still exists. You just become somebody else's or somewhere else's problem. Can I ask briefly what made the change? What helped you?
In the end, somebody sort of giving me a sofa to stay on, a sort of a friend, is somebody that I ended up in a relationship with for a while. And sort of from there, they gave me enough time. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is going to sound really harsh because there's plenty of people who've given me that chance before, who've given me a sofa to stay on for a few months.
Okay.
But a few months doesn't always solve the problem. If a few months later you're still... I think it took me about a year of being relatively safely stable to find stable work.
Yes.
Because while at first I could get the odd job doing a few weeks here and a few weeks there through an agency, most places don't want to take you on when your interview question of what have you done the last 5 years? Well, mostly slept on the streets of Oxford.
So you need a hand up, but you also need a kind of a permanent platform of support, or at least a solid platform of support. And sorry, go on.
I was going to say, you never get those from homeless shelters. I've stayed in obviously lots of shelters, and there's two types. There's the type where you get a bed for the night, but then you have to turn up at sort of 4 p.m. or whatever the time is the next day, stand in line and hope that they've got a bed for you that night again. It's never kind of guaranteed that you've got a bed for 2 nights or something. It's just the night that you've got it for.
Sure. And so it doesn't bring any stability into your life, and of course sometimes the shelters can be quite dysfunctional places. A pal of mine who I made friends with when he was selling the Big Issue around the corner from the studio, Aaron, I spoke about a few times on the programme, who like you, got the help that he needed and got back on his feet. But he would tell me that he felt less safe in the shelters sometimes than he did in the subway down by Tower Bridge, where he would routinely bed down for the night.